There comes a moment when even silence feels loud. You sit in the dark and it's not peace, it's pressure. You breathe, but it doesn't reach your lungs. You exist, but nothing feels alive. This isn't sadness, it's not burnout, it's something colder. A quiet collapse, a life too full of masks and too empty of meaning. And then it comes, the whisper you can't unhear. Something in me has to die. You don't say it out loud, you barely think it. But it's there, like a weight pressing against your chest from the inside. There's a version of you that you've been dragging for years. The people pleaser, the achiever, the perfectionist, the one who smiles on cue, the one who keeps promises they never wanted to make. That version helped you survive, but now it's killing you, quietly, systematically. This isn't a crisis, it's a threshold. The kind Jung spoke of when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And the darkness is this. The character you built to be loved is the same one sabotaging your freedom. You feel it when you can't finish anything, when you ruin the moments that matter, when your body begs for rest, but your mind keeps looping shame. You want to change, but you can't, because change would mean letting go of the only version of yourself you've ever been rewarded for. And maybe, like Schopenhauer said, you can do what you will, but you cannot will what you will. Meaning, your desires might not even be yours. They're echoes, leftovers, constructs built from trauma, fear, and unspoken needs. So you sit there at midnight, not the one on the clock, the other kind, the symbolic one, the soul hour, when your eyes are open, but your chest is tight, when the pain doesn't scream, it whispers, when the voice that sabotages you is louder than anything outside. That's where the real question lives. What part of you is surviving at the cost of your clarity? What needs to be buried, not healed? Because you're not broken, you're overcrowded, and something must die. The identity you built to be accepted is killing who you are. There was a time when your survival depended on being what others needed you to be. Maybe it started in childhood, a look of disappointment from a parent, the sting of rejection, the subtle reward for being easy, good, quiet. You adapted. You became what the moment required, not out of strategy, out of necessity, out of love, out of fear. But what was once a defense has become your prison. You no longer remember who you were before the mask. You've worn it so long it fused with your skin. It smiles when you're breaking. It agrees when your soul screams no. It succeeds, but every win feels like a loss. And the most dangerous part? You think it's you. Winnicott called it the false self, a version of identity sculpted not from desire, but from danger. It protected the child, but it strangles the adult. You perform a life that doesn't feel yours. You keep up appearances that don't match your inner world. And every day, the gap widens between the person you are and the one you pretend to be. You catch glimpses of your real self in moments of solitude, in music that hurts too much, in memories that return uninvited, in choices you don't explain to anyone. But then the mask tightens again, responsibilities, expectations, the silent pressure to keep being you, even when you're not sure who that is anymore. It's not a crisis of identity, it's identity as crisis. Because the more you live through this persona, the more your soul fragments beneath it. And there's a cost, there's always a cost. You feel disconnected, not just from people, but from yourself. You feel tired, not in your body, but in your being. You feel lost, not in the world, but in your own reflection. And the brutal truth is this: the person you appear to be is not someone you can bear to keep being. The fear of failing is already making you fail in silence. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, but tomorrow arrives and you're still stuck in the same chair with the same weight in your chest, pretending it's about time management. It's not. It never was. It's not laziness. It's panic wearing the mask of distraction. You're not putting things off because you don't care. You're putting them off because if you try, really try, and still fall short, then the fear becomes real, tangible, proven, so you avoid the test. You abandon the race before the starting shot, just so you can say, I could have if I wanted to. It's a fragile form of control, a way to protect the last illusion you still believe in. That maybe, somewhere, there's a version of you that doesn't fail. But you never meet that version, because you never give them a chance, and so you rot in the middle, not succeeding, not collapsing, just hovering in the almost. Cognitive dissonance feeds the cycle. It's easier to believe you weren't ready than to admit you tried, and it still wasn't enough. Your mind rewrites reality to preserve your ego, even if it costs your future. But the pain leaks out anyway. It leaks when you scroll for hours and call it rest. It leaks when you lie awake at night wondering why nothing ever changes. It leaks when someone believes in you, and it hurts instead of healing. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if the why is missing? What if the only voice you hear inside is the one that says, "Don't even try"? You already know how this ends. You think you're protecting yourself from failure, but you're living in it, quietly, repeatedly. And no one sees the collapse because from the outside, you're still functioning, still smiling, still saying, "I'm just tired." But the truth is, you're not scared of failing. You're scared of changing and still hating who you are. You're not tired. You're disconnected from yourself. There's a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep touches. You rest. You cancel plans. You lie in bed for hours. But the weight remains. It doesn't lift because it's not physical. It's existential. This isn't fatigue. It's grief. Grief for a version of your life that never got to live. Grief for a voice inside you that's been whispering for years and never once got answered. You move through routines. You meet deadlines. You check boxes, but something essential is missing. A silence between breaths, a numbness beneath the smile. Viktor Frankl called it the existential vacuum, that subtle, suffocating sense that even when everything looks normal, you feel like you're disappearing, not because you're broken, but because you've been too far from yourself for too long. When was the last time you sat with your thoughts without needing to escape them, without music, without screens, without pretending? What if your tiredness isn't about overwork, but about being untrue? What if the life you're living doesn't align with your inner compass, and your soul has started revolting quietly? That feeling in your chest, the one you keep calling stress, maybe it's your real self knocking, not to scare you, but to wake you. Because connection doesn't come from doing more. It comes from remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And sometimes the deepest rest isn't sleep, it's truth. The cycle where you fail, punish yourself, and begin again without ever leaving the same place. You promise to change, you try, you fail, and then you bleed yourself with guilt again. It's not a habit, it's a ritual. You don't just fail. You make yourself pay for it, with silence, with shame, with that subtle self-hatred that whispers you deserved this all along. And then you start over, not because you believe in yourself, but because you're desperate to silence the inner noise. But the script never changes. It's a cycle of self-abandonment that wears the costume of self-discipline. You call it accountability, responsibility, even growth. But underneath it's something darker, something older. It's the belief that you only deserve love if you suffer first. You learned it young, maybe not in words but in atmosphere, in glances, in punishments that were called lessons. You internalized the logic. Only pain makes you worthy. Only struggle earns you attention. And now you apply that logic to yourself with surgical precision. You become both the judge and the prisoner. Jung would say this is the realm of unconscious complexes, emotional blueprints formed in trauma, operating beneath awareness, steering your choices, your reactions, your entire identity. You think you're choosing, but really, you're reenacting. Reenacting a wound that hasn't closed. Reenacting a voice that wasn't yours to begin with. And the most brutal part? You think this suffering is noble. You confuse it with redemption. But punishing yourself isn't the same as transforming. It's just another way to stay in the loop. Suffering enough to feel alive, but never enough to feel free. Because somewhere inside, a part of you still believes, if I hurt enough, maybe I'll finally be good enough. Udiz, the voice that humiliates you when you fail, didn't come from you. There's a sound inside your head that feels like truth. It whispers when you mess up. It screams when you try. It mocks your plans before you even speak them aloud. And you've lived with it for so long you call it thinking. But it isn't. It's echo. You absorbed it without knowing. From a parent, a teacher, a wound, a betrayal. From someone who made you feel small, repeatedly, precisely, relentlessly, until their voice became a part of your inner architecture. And now, it speaks with your mouth. It says, you'll never make it. It says, why do you even try? It says, you're not enough. You've never been enough. You believe this voice because it's familiar, because it sounds like you, because your nervous system has learned to organize itself around its rhythm, as if emotional pain were the baseline of your existence. But believing it doesn't make it yours. The brain has a loop, a survival glitch. It repeats emotional patterns that feel true, simply because they're known. This is not logic. This is memory disguised as identity. The inner critic isn't clarity, it's a possession. And the real tragedy? You don't just hear it, you obey it. You shape your choices around it. You stay small, you stay silent. You stay in the shadows, not because you belong there, but because the voice says that's the safest place. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because if you failed after stepping into your full self, what would be left? So you let the echo guide you and call it humility or realism or wisdom. But in truth, it's trauma talking, dressed in the tone of authority. The mind can be a cage, and sometimes the bars are made of voices you never chose. The part of you that always stops right before the finish line is not afraid of failure. It's afraid of becoming. You almost do it. Again, you write the first lines, you open the project, you speak the truth half out loud, you feel the surge, that flicker of becoming, and then you disappear into distractions, into doubts, into the soft fog of delay. You tell yourself you'll finish later, but later never arrives, because almost has become your safest place, not because it's right, but because it's predictable, because real failure, full collapse, would be too much, too sharp, too final. So you stay close enough to feel potential, but far enough to never have to face what it would mean to give everything and still fall. This is how the mind protects itself. This is how your psyche avoids humiliation, by never letting you fully show up. The Zeigarnik effect explains it. The brain clings to unfinished tasks, using them as emotional placeholders. They give you the illusion of momentum, the illusion of future. You tell yourself, I still can. And that hope, that unfinished thread, becomes your drug. But what if the addiction isn't to failure, but to postponement? Because the moment you finish something, you face the truth of how deep your longing runs, of how much you want to matter, of how terrified you are that even your best won't be enough. So you sabotage at the edge of success. Not to avoid defeat, but to delay self-confrontation, because glory would demand transformation. And transformation means mourning who you were, mourning the smallness that once kept you safe. You live in the almost because it protects you, but it also paralyzes you. And in that paralysis, something sacred decays, not your potential, but your belief that you ever deserved to become. The part of you that must die already has a name, and you've whispered it in silence. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You've been trying to fix everything: routines, habits, diets, plans, lists. But the truth is, it's not about doing more. It's about finally admitting what needs to be buried. There's a part of you that no longer belongs here. A belief, a pattern, a role you've played so well that even you forgot it was fiction. It's the voice that keeps you awake at night, the one that says, "You're too much, you're not enough, you're always behind." And it's the relationship that drained your soul, but you keep breathing for it, as if keeping it alive could prove you're lovable. It's the identity stitched from other people's expectations, worn like armor, even though it's killing your movement. You know what it is. You've known it for a long time, but saying it aloud feels like betrayal, because that part of you once saved you. It gave you rules, gave you direction, gave you something to hold on to when everything else collapsed. Now it's the collapse. Transformation isn't always about growth. Sometimes it's about funerals, quiet internal funerals, where you grieve not just what you lost, but who you no longer need to be. There's no applause in this process, no ceremony, just a pen, a blank page, a name you've whispered in the dark, the version of yourself that you're finally ready to let go of, not with hate, but with clarity, with trembling, with love that says, "You helped me survive. But you can't come with me anymore." Real change begins when you stop negotiating with the part of you that's already dead. Becoming yourself will feel like betrayal, because it is. No one warns you about the cost of becoming. They talk about growth as if it's a sunrise, but they forget the part where you burn the bridge behind you. They forget the part where you look at the version of yourself that survived so much and say, "I can't carry you anymore." That's not just change. That's symbolic murder. To evolve, you have to betray the image you once fought to protect. You have to shatter the story you told others, and worse, the one you told yourself. And it hurts, because that version wasn't fake. It was real. It was necessary. It held your pain. It gave you shape when you were dissolving. It performed miracles just to keep you alive. But now it's your cage, and every step toward truth feels like treason. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's what this is. The reckoning between who you were taught to be and who you are when no one is watching. This isn't self-improvement, it's self-confrontation. You won't feel empowered. You'll feel disoriented, exposed, alone. Because to choose yourself deeply, irrevocably, you must walk away from the narratives, the roles, the masks that earned you love. And in doing so, you'll feel like the enemy. But you're not. You're just the only one brave enough to question the lie. And what you're about to lose was never truly you. To mourn the version of you that once protected you is also an act of love. This is not a celebration. This is mourning, quiet, internal, sacred. Because even if that part of you was built from fear, it was still yours. Even if it distorted your truth, it kept you alive long enough to face it. Even if it now suffocates you, it once held you when no one else could. So yes, it must die, but not with hatred, with reverence. Jung didn't speak of perfection. He spoke of individuation, of becoming whole through the integration of shadow. Not by erasing the past, but by absorbing its truth without letting it define your future. That mask you wore, it was never a lie. It was a phase, an armor, a language you created to be heard, until you realized it wasn't your voice. And now, the mask comes off, not with a scream, but with a silence. A deep, aching silence that feels like loss and freedom at the same time. Frankl said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And maybe you didn't choose this pain, but you can choose what it becomes. You are not broken. You're just in the middle of an inner funeral. And there's no need to rush grief. It's a sacred rite. Let the version of you that once saved you rest. And in that rest, feel something stir, not loudly, not suddenly, but like a breath finally reaching the lungs. A beginning, quiet, undeniable. It's still time to be born again. No applause, just truth.